The air in Beattyville, Kentucky, in the sweltering July of 1988, hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from humidity and the persistent, high-pitched hum of cicadas. This was the soundtrack to a childhood that felt both timeless and fleeting, steeped in the natural world that surrounded the small, isolated town nestled deep within the rugged embrace of the Appalachian foothills. 11-year-old Caleb Miller, a boy with an insatiable curiosity and an adventurous spirit, knew these woods like the back of his hand. His world was not one of arcades or cable television, though he'd heard whispers of such urban wonders, but rather a vast, untamed playground of ancient trees, winding creeks, and secret clearings. Caleb's messy mop of sandy brown hair perpetually tumbled into his bright, inquisitive eyes, perpetually narrowed against the glare of the Kentucky sun. His face was a canvas of summer, dotted with a constellation of freckles and a nose that seemed to permanently sport a fresh peel. His attire was a familiar uniform, a faded Clash t-shirt, its punk rock rebellion softened by countless washes, and a pair of cut-off denim shorts, often patched, always smudged with the rich, red Kentucky clay. Cinched around his waist was his most prized possession, a worn leather belt featuring a distinctive, gleaming silver buckle, meticulously crafted in the shape of a soaring eagle. It was a gift from his grandpa Earl, a memento of shared fishing trips and quiet lessons about the wilderness, a tangible piece of his heritage and a symbol of his own free spirit. His home, a humble two-story farmhouse, stood on the very edge of town, where manicured lawns gave way abruptly to the dense, sprawling wilderness of the Daniel Boone National Forest. For Caleb, these woods were a personal kingdom. He'd spend countless hours exploring the labyrinthine network of deer trails that snaked through the undergrowth, leading to hidden swimming holes along Cow Creek, or to the skeletal remains of an old logging path, long overgrown and almost swallowed by the forest floor. His father, Thomas Miller, a man hardened by years of working the land, had issued countless warnings about that particular path. "Too many hazards, son," Thomas would intone, his voice a low rumble, "and too far out there if you get yourself into a spot of trouble." But Thomas's warnings, born of a deep, protective love, often only fueled Caleb's imagination. To Caleb, the woods were boundless freedom, a place where he could be Huckleberry Finn, a fearless frontiersman, or simply a boy blissfully lost in the profound wonder of nature's embrace, the distant hum of the single-lane Highway 11 his only tether to the outside world. Sarah Miller, Caleb's mother, was a woman whose hands spoke volumes, calloused from years of tending a sprawling garden, preserving its bounty in countless mason jars, and mending the endless tears in her family's clothes. She was the heart of their home, her presence a comforting warmth amidst the summer's languor. She'd often call him in for supper with a sigh that was half exasperation, half affection. "Caleb, dinner's ready. And for heaven's sake, don't you dare track in another pound of mud." He'd emerge from the tree line almost on cue, usually sporting a grubby, triumphant grin and often clutching a handful of wild berries, smelling faintly of sunshine, creek water, and the sweet, earthy scent of the forest floor. Their life was simple, woven into the predictable rhythm of rural Kentucky, a tapestry of hard work, quiet joys, and the enduring bonds of family and community. Tuesday, July 18th, 1988, dawned like any other, promising another day of scorching heat. The sun was already beating down by 8 in the morning. Caleb, ever the willing helper, had assisted his father with the morning chores, scattering feed for the clucking chickens and gathering freshly laid eggs. He then spent a frustrating hour wrestling with the rusty, recalcitrant chain of his ancient bicycle, ultimately conceding defeat. By early afternoon, with his bike still stubbornly broken, he declared his intention to visit his favorite fishing spot on Cow Creek. "Just gonna see if all big-mouth bass is feeling hungry today, Ma," he shouted, grabbing his bamboo fishing pole and a battered tackle box, the plastic lure glinting in the sun. Sarah, momentarily distracted by a mountain of laundry, waved absently from the porch, a familiar, almost imperceptible knot of maternal worry tightening in her stomach. "You be back before the sun starts dipping low, you hear me, boy?" Her voice carried across the yard, a melody of love and caution. "Yes, Ma," Caleb's response, already muffled by the increasing distance, was swallowed by the dense tree line as he vanished from sight. The hours that followed were indistinguishable from countless others. The sun embarked on its slow, majestic descent, bleeding across the western sky, painting the clouds in hues of bruised purple and angry orange, a fitting backdrop for the growing dread that began to settle upon the miller's humble home. Thomas returned from the fields, his shirt damp with sweat, smelling of freshly turned earth. Sarah had already laid out supper on the kitchen table. "Caleb not back yet?" Thomas inquired, his gaze instinctively drifting towards the empty chair at the table. "Not yet. He knows better than to be this late," Sarah replied, her voice taut, a faint frown etching itself between her brows. While Caleb occasionally pushed the boundaries of his curfew, this felt different. The air in the kitchen, usually alive with the hum of conversation, was thick with an unnameable tension. As the last vestiges of daylight faded and the first mournful call of a whippoorwill pierced the deepening twilight, a cold, insidious dread began to coil in Sarah's stomach, tightening with each passing minute. "He really should be back by now, Thomas," she said, her voice barely a whisper, laced with a fear she tried desperately to suppress. Thomas, a man whose strength was usually unwavering, felt an icy tendril of panic snake up his own spine. He strode onto the porch, his voice, usually booming, now edged with a nascent tremor. "Caleb." Caleb Miller, his calls echoed across the silent fields, swallowed by the oppressive quiet of the encroaching night. Only the ceaseless chirping of the crickets and the rustling of leaves in a phantom breeze dared to answer. They waited. 10 minutes stretched into 20, then 30, each ticking second an unbearable eternity. The fear solidified, chilling them to the bone. Thomas grabbed his heavy-duty maglite, the flashlight that always sat by the door, its solid weight a small comfort. "He's probably just playing a trick," he muttered, the words more an attempt to soothe Sarah's burgeoning hysteria than to convince himself. "I'll go check by the creek, he can't have gone far." An hour later, Thomas returned, his face ashen, grim. His eyes, usually so full of a quiet resolve, now held a haunted, desolate look. There had been no sign of Caleb. The fishing pole was gone from its usual leaning spot against the oak tree. The creek bank, a familiar stomping ground, showed no fresh footprints, no disturbed pebbles, nothing to indicate recent presence. Panic, now a full-blown inferno, clawed at their throats, scorching their lungs. Sarah collapsed into gut-wrenching sobs, clinging to her husband, her body racked with a primal fear. Thomas, a man who had weathered countless storms, felt his entire world violently wrenched from its axis. His hand trembled uncontrollably as he reached for the rotary phone, dialing the local sheriff's department, a number etched into the collective memory of every Beattyville resident, usually reserved for mundane matters or minor disputes. This call was different. This call was life or death. Deputy Sheriff Mark Jenkins, a man whose years on the force had etched deep lines around his tired but kind eyes, arrived with a dispatch of weary resignation. He knew the Millers, knew Caleb, a bright, spirited kid who often waved to him from the porch swing. Every child in Beattyville knew Deputy Jenkins, a testament to the close-knit fabric of their community. Seeing Sarah's tear-streaked face, contorted by a grief too profound for words, and Thomas's rigid, silent despair, his stomach churned with a sickening premonition. "All right, Thomas, Sarah, just tell me everything from the beginning," he said, his voice gentle but firm, pulling out a small, dog-eared notepad, its pages already filled with the prosaic details of small-town life. This entry would be anything but prosaic. The initial search was an outpouring of desperate, raw hope, bordering on chaotic. Neighbors, friends, the entire volunteer fire department, all converged on the dark, foreboding woods. Flashlights, some battery-powered, others old lanterns, cut erratic, dancing beams through the inky blackness, like frantic fireflies desperately seeking a beacon. "Caleb, Caleb Miller," voices cried, hoarse with worry, their shouts swallowed by the dense foliage, absorbed by the ancient trees. They scoured the familiar banks of Cow Creek, the well-worn trails, the periphery of the Miller property. But the woods, so vibrant and alive during the day, now felt sinister and silent, an impenetrable fortress guarding its secrets, swallowing their anguished pleas. They found nothing, not a scuffed shoe, not a dropped fishing lure, not even a broken twig that seemed out of place. It was as if Caleb had simply vanished into thin air. By the first brutal light of dawn, the organized search began. The Kentucky State Police were called in, bringing with them a more structured approach, but even their resources were stretched thin in this remote corner of the state. Bloodhounds were brought in, their trained noses pressed to the hot, dry earth, but the oppressive summer heat and the sheer, overwhelming density of the Daniel Boone National Forest proved to be formidable adversaries. The dogs quickly lost the scent, or perhaps found too many conflicting animal trails, their efforts ultimately yielding no concrete leads. Days bled into weeks, each passing moment deepening the despair. The story of the missing boy, Caleb Miller, initially made headlines in the local Beattyville newspaper, then slowly spread to regional news outlets, drawing a small, fleeting flurry of media attention. Reporters flocked to Beattyville, their cameras flashing, their microphones extended, eager for a scoop. but there was little to report beyond the miller's heartbreaking, increasingly desperate pleas. Sarah, once a vibrant presence, became a spectral figure, a ghost haunting the edges of the search parties, her eyes hollow, her voice a perpetual, fragile whisper of her son's name. Thomas, usually a pillar of quiet strength, visibly withered, his shoulders stooped with an unimaginable burden. He spent his days relentlessly combing the woods, his nights staring at Caleb's empty bed, the gleaming image of the eagle belt buckle, now a symbol of his son's absence, a constant, tormenting torment. The community, initially galvanized by shock and a shared sense of responsibility, rallied around the Millers, holding tearful prayer vigils, bringing casseroles, organizing more volunteer searches. But hope, a fragile, ephemeral thing, began to fray at the edges, slowly succumbing to the relentless march of time and the brutal silence of the forest. Rumors, born of fear and desperation, circulated like wildfire. A mysterious drifter seen hitchhiking on Highway 11, an old, dilapidated cabin rumored to house unsavory characters deep in the hills, even the chilling possibility of a wild animal attack. But none of these whispers ever materialized into anything concrete, any lead that could be followed. The investigation, despite Jenkins's tireless efforts, hit an insurmountable wall. Without a body, without a single piece of tangible, irrefutable evidence, without so much as a credible witness, the case of Caleb Miller slowly, inevitably, became another missing persons file, gathering dust in the small Beattyville sheriff's office. Deputy Jenkins, who had personally scoured every inch of the accessible woods, his boots worn thin from the relentless trekking, felt the profound weight of this failure pressing down on his soul. He carried Caleb's innocent face in his mind, a silent reproach, a constant reminder of the unsolved mystery. The Kentucky State Police, their resources finite, eventually scaled back their involvement, leaving the local department to manage the lingering, heartbreaking questions that continued to echo through the hills. Years, long and cruel, continued their inexorable march. The once vibrant, hand-drawn missing posters, initially plastered on every lamp post and general store window, faded under the relentless sun and rain, their edges curling, their messages blurring, until they were eventually, mercifully, taken down. Caleb's room, once a sanctuary of boyish chaos, remained a shrine, carefully preserved but less and less visited, the air growing stale with unspoken grief. His younger sister Emily, who was only 5 when her big brother vanished, grew up with a phantom sibling, a shadow in family photos, a constant ache in her parents' eyes. The Millers, bowed but unbroken, aged beyond their years, their faces etched with a profound, unyielding grief that never truly receded, becoming as much a part of them as their breath. They never moved from their farmhouse, never truly relinquished hope, not entirely, but the active, desperate search ceased. The world, as it always does, moved on, leaving them stranded in a desolate sea of unanswered questions, a family forever incomplete. It was a crisp, clear autumn day, October 15, 2003. 15 years, 3 months, and 28 days had passed since Caleb Miller disappeared. The air held the sharp, clean scent of approaching winter, and the vast, ancient hardwoods of the Daniel Boone National Forest were ablaze with a breathtaking, fiery palette of fall colors, brilliant reds, vibrant oranges, deep, burnished golds. Earl Johnson and Bobby Lay, 2 seasoned, lifelong hunting buddies from Hazard, Kentucky, were deep within a remote, rarely traversed section of the forest. They were miles from any marked trail, their only compass the sun and their innate woodsman's intuition, honed over decades of quiet communion with nature. They were primarily after deer, but perhaps more profoundly, they were after the sacred quiet, the unspoken camaraderie of the wilderness, a cherished tradition passed down through generations of Kentucky men. They had been painstakingly pushing through a particularly dense thicket, a tangled maze of thorny brush and low-hanging branches, diligently following a faint, almost invisible deer track. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the crunch of their boots on fallen leaves and the distant caw of a crow. Then, a peculiar, unsettling smell assailed them. It wasn't the usual earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves, nor the pungent aroma of game. This was something else entirely, something cloying and faintly metallic, overlaid with the sickly sweetness of advanced decomposition. "What in tarnation is that ungodly smell?" Earl grumbled, his robust features contorted in a grimace. Bobby, the more experienced and acutely observant woodsman, felt an immediate, icy prickle of unease crawl up his spine. "Could be a deer carcass, Earl, but I don't know, something ain't right." Compelled by a morbid primal curiosity, they pressed on, their senses on high alert. The smell intensified, growing more distinct, more horrifying. Then Bobby abruptly stopped dead in his tracks, his worn hunting rifle lowering slowly, silently. His eyes, usually sharp and discerning, were wide with a dawning horror. "Earl," he whispered, his voice barely audible, raw with shock, "look." Nestled in a shallow, overgrown ravine, partially obscured by a dense carpet of fallen leaves and a tangled snarl of roots, was a small, tattered bundle of what looked like fabric. As they cautiously drew closer, the full, sickening horror of their discovery became agonizingly clear. It wasn't merely fabric. It was the pitiful remnants of clothes, faded to near obscurity, bleached by 15 years of relentless sun and rain, chewed by the insidious teeth of time and the hungry gnaw of forest creatures. And within these skeletal garments, barely discernible against the damp, dark earth, were bones. Small bones. A small, fragmented skull, half buried beneath a layer of soil and leaves, stared up at the indifferent autumn sky, two empty sockets fixed in a silent, eternal scream, a testament to a life tragically, brutally cut short. Earl, usually a man of boisterous humor and unwavering resolve, was struck utterly speechless, his breath catching in his throat. Bobby, his face pale and clammy, his hands trembling, fumbled for his flip phone, a relatively new marvel of technology that still struggled for a consistent signal in these remote, unforgiving depths of the wilderness. After several desperate attempts, he miraculously managed to get a faint connection, just enough to dial 911. We found something," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy, shaking uncontrollably, deep in the Daniel Boone. "Miles past Big Pine Trail, looks like human remains, a child, God help us." Sheriff Mark Jenkins, the very same Deputy Jenkins from 1988, now with a distinguished streak of silver in his once dark hair and deeper, more pronounced lines etched around his perpetually tired eyes, took the call. His heart, already burdened by years of unsolved cases, sank with a sickening certainty. He knew without being told, the location, the age, the sheer passage of time. There was only one missing child in this desolate quadrant of Kentucky from that haunting era. He dispatched a specialized team immediately, including forensic specialists from the Kentucky State Police, their cutting-edge equipment a stark, painful contrast to the rudimentary, almost desperate methods employed 15 years prior. The scene, meticulously protected and slowly processed, was a painstaking, heartbreaking tableau. The remains were fragmented, scattered over a small area, evidence of scavenging animals and the relentless, natural decay of time. But they were undeniably there. Amidst the tattered, almost skeletal remnants of a faded t-shirt and cut-off denim shorts, painstakingly sifted from the leaf litter, forensic technicians made a poignant discovery. A small, tarnished silver belt buckle, meticulously shaped like a soaring eagle. The confirmation, though agonizingly expected, struck with the force of a physical blow, a punch to the gut. Later, meticulous dental records from Caleb's childhood sealed the tragic identification. Caleb Miller, the boy who had vanished without a trace, had at last been found. The news ripped through Beattyville like a fresh, jagged wound, tearing open old scars that had never truly healed. For the Millers, it was a confirmation of their darkest, most persistent fears, yet paradoxically, it also brought a strange, unsettling measure of peace. Caleb was no longer lost in the agonizing abyss of what-ifs, no longer an open wound of perpetual uncertainty. He was found, but this fragile peace was almost immediately shattered by a deluge of new, tormenting questions. How did he get there? This shallow ravine was not only miles from where the initial, exhaustive searches had been conducted, but it was in an area so remote, so utterly inaccessible, that it defied all logic that an 11-year-old boy would wander there alone. And what precisely had happened to him? The new investigation, a cold case unit resurrected from the somber archives, was spearheaded by Detective Sarah Vance, a sharp, unyielding woman from the Kentucky State Police, whose analytical mind was a stark contrast to Sheriff Jenkins's weary, intuitive approach. They painstakingly reviewed the original files, the fading, handwritten notes, the grainy, black and white photographs that seemed to echo with the despair of a bygone era. They re-interviewed the Millers, the elderly neighbors whose memories were now hazy and fragmented, the original searchers whose recollection of details had blurred with the passage of 15 long years. The original scene, the Miller property and its immediate surroundings, had long since been reclaimed by the relentless growth of the forest, any subtle clues erased by time and the elements. Forensic anthropologists meticulously examined the skeletal remains. They could determine Caleb's approximate age at the time of death, his gender, and even a rough range for the time he had been deceased. But there were no obvious signs of overt trauma, No bullet holes, no clear stab wounds, no unmistakable fractures indicating a violent struggle. The official cause of death was frustratingly ruled undetermined. Yet, the sheer remoteness of the location where Caleb's remains were discovered, the profound isolation, gnawed relentlessly at the investigators. An 11-year-old boy, even an adventurous one, rarely strayed so far, so deep into such an unforgiving, trackless wilderness without a compelling purpose, or without being taken there. Was it a tragic, isolated accident? A fall into the ravine, succumbing to injuries or exposure? Or was something far more sinister at play, a predator lurking in the shadows of the beautiful but dangerous forest? The Millers, their faces etched with a renewed, complex grief, finally buried Caleb in the small, windswept cemetery overlooking Cow Creek, the very creek he had so dearly loved. He finally had a headstone, a tangible place for his family to mourn, to remember, to whisper his name to the whispering winds. But the ultimate answers, the precise truth of what transpired on that fateful July day, remained agonizingly elusive. Detective Vance and Sheriff Jenkins pursued every slim lead, every whisper of an old rumor that resurfaced, but the trail was colder than any winter in the Kentucky hills. The dense, ancient woods had reluctantly given up their long-held secret, the location of Caleb's final resting place, but they steadfastly refused to betray the how or the who. Caleb Miller's case remains officially unsolved to this day, an open wound in the collective memory of Beattyville. His story is a chilling, poignant reminder of the unforgiving nature of the Appalachian wilderness, the inherent limitations of rural law enforcement in a bygone era, and the enduring, profound agony of a family left with only fragments of the truth, forever haunted by the unknown. The Daniel Boone National Forest, vast and ancient, still holds its secrets close, its towering poplars and ancient oaks standing as silent, indifferent witnesses to a boy's last, unknown moments. And in the quiet hollows and forgotten corners of Beattyville, Kentucky, the indelible memory of Caleb Miller, the boy with the eagle belt buckle, still casts a long, mournful shadow, a perpetual echo of a life tragically cut short, a mystery forever whispering in the wind.